So GPT-5 was just released the other day, and I want to make this video to perform real-world coding tests. There's already tons of videos going over the specs, so I'm not going to go and rehash the same stuff. So what I want to go over on this video, however, is to showcase how GPT-5 and how it performs in real-world scenario. So I've been testing it a lot nonstop for the past day for building actual applications using WindSurf IDE, since it's currently free to use for a limited time. So can it handle more complex tasks? How does it handle setting up new projects? What reasoning model should you be using? I'm going to try and answer these questions in this video. For demonstration purposes and see what GPT-5 is capable of, I will show you how to set up a React Native project in case you're interested in building your own mobile application. If you're not familiar with React Native, it's an open source framework for building cross-platform mobile apps using JavaScript or TypeScript. So it simplifies the experience by allowing you to build for Android or iOS using a single language. For debugging, I like using Expo Go to easily preview changes in my actual device since it allows for tunneling. So with that out of the way, let's go over some of the things that are included in GPT-5. All right, so let's take a look at the GPT-5 models briefly, and then I just want to go over my observation in terms of usage when coding with GPT-5. But let's go ahead and check out the different models that just released. So did you have the GPT-5 Nano and Mini, which the fastest and also the most cost-effective. Not necessarily the best, but fast and also the cheapest. Then you have the GPT-5 Chat, which is what you interface with when using it in ChatGPT, and then GPT-5 is basically what they use for coding in a task across domains. So looking at the specs here, 400,000 context window, how much conversation it can retain in memory, and also 128,000 max output tokens. So it can produce a rather large max amount of output. In comparison with models Opus 4.1 and if you scroll down to the bottom, you'll see that the context window for Claude Sonnet 4 is only 200,000 across Sonnet 3.74 and Opus 4.1. And also the tokens also is much smaller compared to GPT-5, 32,000 tokens and then 64,000 tokens. So basically GPT-5 has a leg up as far as the max output that it can produce and also the context window for it. I just want to go over my key observations when working with GPT-5 in terms of coding. So in terms of working on a task, you want to work on one task at a time, which kind of ties in what the other observation. You want it to be precise, and instead of having multiple tasks, break it down into a smaller subset of that task so you can just focus on one single thing at a time. And then learn when to use different level of reasoning. I started with high, but there's also the medium and low. For the most part, you want to go with low if you want fast and precise type of coding. Medium is probably within the 5% of some of the tasks that you're working on. And then high is if you're working on a very complex task that will require some research and you want it to take time and reason within itself, since it tends to overthink and overanalyze some of the things that you could be asking for. Next thing is GPT-5 follows a lot more precisely. So sometimes when you instruct the model to perform certain things, it tends to become eager. So you want to be precise, and it ties in here at the bottom where you have to guide it and properly instruct it. So you kind of have to do some research ahead of time, especially when you're working with library. Make sure that you include as much instruction as possible, what framework you're using, what version, and also anything that you can provide as far as context to the model so that it can properly work on the task. One thing that I noticed when working with GPT-5 is it can work on multiple tasks in parallel. So it would split up a task within multiple sub-agents, let's say 5 or 10, so that it speed up the process of coming up with an actual result. Low is what I tend to use for my daily coding. Sonnet 4, and if I show you my WindSurf activity, Sonnet 4 is still my highest one as far as coding completion. So let's quickly talk about two different ways that you can build a mobile application. The first one is a native app. So typically when you're building native apps, you're going to be targeting the specific platform, either Android or iOS. For Android, you're going to be using Kotlin or Java. and you're going to be using Android Studio. For iOS, you're going to be using a language called Swift, which uses Xcode as your IDE. So that's the typical way of doing it. It used to be Objective-C. Swift is now the standard for building iOS application. The second type of apps that you're going to be encountering in the wild is something called hybrid apps. You're still targeting Android and iOS, but you're writing it in a single framework. So typically, the options out there are either Flutter or React Native. And there's some other hybrid applications, frameworks that you can also use out there. When you write in Flutter or React Native, you're going to be using HTML or CSS and JavaScript, and that code is going to be in a shell called web container, which then gets compiled into the native Android and iOS components. When you're writing in hybrid application, you can write in one single framework or language, and it will target both Android and iOS. When writing an app in hybrid application versus native application, where you have to know Kotlin and then you have to know Swift language, and then you have to write it and compile it, make sure that it matches. When you push this application, you're going to be deploying it separately. Versus a hybrid application where you write everything at once, either in React Native or in Flutter, and it's just going to compile for you in distributions for either Android and iOS, and have to learn multiple languages. So that's kind of the biggest advantage. But the single disadvantage of using hybrid application is that the performance, in some way, it's becoming negligible depending on what type of application you're building. If you're building a game, you're probably best just writing it in native application. But if you're just writing some forms or some pages where it's not really performance intensive, then you can probably get away with hybrid application. So that's kind of the biggest difference. For this demo, we're going to be using React Native. If you look at here, the latest version as of current is 0.80. And that's what we're going to be using. And we're also going to be using Expo Go for debugging. We can use Expo Go to test out the app in our actual device. So we can run this within the simulator, which we're going to be using Xcode and Android Studio. So you still need Xcode if you're building for a specific app. This is our way to debug the app and test it. So whether you're building out in Android or iOS devices, you're going to be needing these separate application to be able to compile and build out on those devices. So we're going to go ahead and go to the next step of the application and start building this app. Let's talk about the tools next. If you're building for Android, you're going to have to install Android Studio. Android Studio is going to be available on the Windows or the Mac OS side. And if you are building for iOS, unfortunately, you have to have Mac OS and you need to have Xcode to be able to compile the code and debug it. Even though we're not really particularly writing in Swift, you still need to have Xcode to be able to start the simulator. And then for Android, we can pick from various options of Android device out there that you're going to be debugging with. So you're going to need Android Studio regardless. And the next one that we're going to be using later on is Expo Go. We have some documentation in place. And then one thing that we're also going to be using, which is React Native. So this is the one that we're going to be using to build out the application. We're going to be using JavaScript, HTML, and CSS to actually build out the actual application. Let's quickly talk about setting up for the Xcode. If you haven't installed Xcode yet, just open up the App Store on your Mac OS and then search for Xcode and then install it. Once you have it installed, just go ahead and open it and you're going to see something like this. So you're just going to have to go to your settings, and then inside of your settings, you're going to see here under components, you're going to have to install the simulator for iOS device. So if you're targeting other devices, such as the watchOS or tvOS, you're gonna have to get those. But this is what it's gonna look like if you don't have those devices yet. You're gonna have to go get it. But if you do already, like I have here, it's gonna show that I have the simulator available here with the version and then the size on the disk. All right, so that's gonna be the iOS, and you should be ready to go after that. And the next thing that we need to install is Android Studio. So let's go ahead and install. So you're gonna go ahead and download this and install it on your Mac OS. If you want to build for Android, you're going to have to install Android Studio. So let's go ahead and download that. And then after you have it installed, we're going to go ahead and open it. So I'm going to go open it and launch it. And initially, this is what you're going to see. You're going to have to go to more actions and you're going to go into the virtual device manager. And if you go to the device manager, you can see here the list of the devices that I have available that I want to use to debug my application virtually. So currently I have Pixel 9 Pro and then Medium Phone API. If you want to add additional devices, you can do that by hit on the plus icon. And then from here, you can select from the many types of devices that's currently available. So there's the phone, tablet, if you want to build for the tablet for Android. In my case, I just want to be able to test it on my Pixel 9. This is why I chose Pixel 9 here, but you can also do Pixel 9 Pro, Fold, and it's going to give you the various specs. And then once you pick that, you're going to have to download it and install it. So once that's completed, you're pretty much ready to go and we can start building the application. All right, so now that we have the Android Studio installed and the Xcode installed on our machine, we're ready to build out the app. So if you look at the screen, I have two sets of prompts that we're going to be using. The first one is the prompt that we're going to be using inside of WindSurf IDE, which is what we're going to be using to build out the React Native application. And the second one is the project rules. We're going to be adding the WindSurf project rules to establish a guideline for WindSurf for the LLM to be able to work on our project and set out the guidelines and standards. So we're going to be plugging it into Grok 4. We're going to be using Sonnet 4, and also we're going to be using it inside of GPT-5. So we're going to feed it into these different LLM tools. So we can pick one and use the one that would work best for our needs. So in order to do that, we're going to be using a platform called Straco. Straco is the one that I've been using for quite some time now. So instead of having to go into these different apps, ChatGPT, Claude, and then Grok to get a response, we're going to go into this platform, which is basically a tool that will allow you to get a response, and you can compare different LLMs under one single platform. And they have some pretty cool tools as well, such as video creation. They have some images. You can use Flux One, Google Image, and OpenAI GPT Image. These different imaging models that you can use. And also they have text-to-speech. You have access to 11 labs under one single price, which is kind of nice. And we're going to go and jump into the Straco's chat here. I created a new chat. And then take a look at the LLMs that I have here defined in my settings page. I have Anthropic's Claude, Sonnet 4, and GPT-5 chat, and Grok for reasoning. So we're going to be using all these different LLMs and feed the prompt, and then we're going to get back the response from different LLMs. So we're going to go and grab the prompt here real quick. I'm just going to copy it, and I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to go paste it. So we're going to create a project rules, and the project that we're going to be building and what we're going to be using as far as technology. And we're going to be using Expo Go to debug and retest the mobile application, right? So I'm going to turn on this smart mode. It's going to modify our prompts to improve it. So we're going to enter and submit this. And as you can see here, it's optimizing our prompt. So now it's coming up and it's giving us the result for all these different AI tools. So you got the Sonnet 4 here. I can switch it between the different views. Tab view, which is the default views that they had before. And then tree view, which kind of gives you like a side-by-side comparison, and then row view, and so on and so forth. So let's go ahead and take a look at the result here. So it gives us a project structure here, starting with the Sonnet 4 development environment. So this is not really a prompt that I would feed into WindSurf per se. And then GPT-5, you can see here, it has like all these different architecture and best practices, framework and version, utilize Expo Go. So it's nice that it organized it in this way. And I really like Grok 4 here. I actually like the response here. It gives us the general guidelines, the different development phases, which we probably don't need when you're starting off with this. But I like the code structure, and I like the testing and quality. So performance and security, optimize for performance, documentation. I like the Sonnet. It kind of gives a breakdown of the different features that our app might include. So I like that for this particular reason. So we're going to be using Grok for the project rules that we're going to be defining inside of WindSurf. All right, so at this point, we're pretty much ready to build the app. I have the prompt here in front of me. So we're going to be developing a workout mobile app in Android and iOS that keeps track of workouts, including exercise, performed, number of sets, and so on and so forth. And then we're going to be using React Native. So I've specified the version here. It's pretty important to just say React Native, but I like to include the version so it knows to use the latest version. If you go into the React Native documentation, so let's say you go into the main site, go to their development guides, and you can see here the various versions that they have available. So always specify the version for any new project that you build. It's not necessary, but I like to just be specific in these regards and include it. And then we're going to be implementing it using industry standard architecture and best practices. We will be using Expo Go to debug and test the mobile application, and then create the project in the current directory. And the reason why I include this is because sometimes it would create the app in a subdirectory. So I always want to include to make sure that it just builds it right in the root directory. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this prompt, and then we're going to go back and switch to WindSurf. So inside of Cascade, we're going to go and switch our model here. So like I said earlier, if you search for GPT-5 model, you're going to see the low, medium, and high reasoning. For 95% of the use cases, you're probably going to be fine with the low reasoning. It's fast and it's smart. If you have a little bit more complex tasks, you can switch to a medium reasoning model. So this is probably like in a small percentage of the tasks that you're going to be working on. So I would only use the high reasoning for 1% of the scenario, and then for most case scenario, low reasoning would be sufficient. So I'm just going to go and paste the prompt here. So develop a workout mobile app, Android and iOS, and then same prompt that I talked about before. Let's just go ahead and hit enter. All right, so after a few seconds, it ran this terminal command. So npx create expo at latest. So for some reason, when it generated or scaffolded the app, it won't let us generate the files under the project directory because it already has some existing project files such as the WindSurf project rules. So we had to create a temporary location folder within the project and then create the project inside of that temporary and then move it back into the main directory. So that's why at first we have to create that temporary folder. But after that, seems like we're good now. So it's telling us how to run the project and navigate to the current directory. So let's go ahead and inspect what we have here so far. So far, it hasn't deleted the main temporary folder, but let's take a look at the assets first. So it's generated a plan here, which initiates the Expo React Native in the current directory. We still have to scaffold the feature-based folder structure. We still have to set up the Redux for state management. So all these different tasks, that's part of the plan that WindSurf has generated for us. So it's still working through the various things that we have in the task here. And then we're just going to go ahead and pause it and then come back after it's completed. So a quick commentary here while it's still building out the project is that the nice thing about this is you don't have to learn what type of libraries needs to be installed, such as the React navigation bottom tabs, React JS toolkit. So all these different things that you probably want to do a little bit of research so that you can plan ahead and then feed it to AI. Then once you have those information, you can just tell it to say, hey, I want to use Redux toolkit for state management and so on and so forth. If you want to use the latest, just specify what you want to use. And it's going to take care of it for you. And as you can see here, it's going through the plan as is created initially. So it's still going through and adding these different components and a screen. So we just have to just sit back and relax and have it finish completing the process. So it looks like it's finished adding these files. So I'm just looking at the various file that it created under the source directory. So the assets is where the images are located. The WindSurf, obviously the project rules, and the .expo here, the various devices and some documentation. But underneath the source and app, here is the Redux JS toolkit initialized for the store and the features and the hooks. We can inspect it and take a look at this one. So if you're vibe coding, you probably don't need to go through these steps, but I just want to check out what they have here. So it created like a folder structure for us with types for exercises at entry, workout, and we have the package.json. It gives us the scripts for starting out the application using Expo. So this is for iOS, for web, and for Android. So if you want to run this, we'll have to do an npx Android and then iOS. So I just want to go through this and see how it looks like. Let's go ahead and test out the app and run it. So it's going to run the application for us, which opens up in a browser. Then we can go ahead and start and pause. So this looks like a basic start rest timer, but we don't want to test it out on the browser. We want to actually test it out on these devices for iOS and Android, so you can actually see what it looks like on the devices. So we're going to go ahead and stop this. So once you told it to actually run it in iOS and Android, what is it going to do is going to open up the simulator for iOS, which is why I picked iPhone 16 Pro. But if you want to simulate in Android, you can see here that there's an error where it says no Android connected device found. So for Android, you want to open up Android Studio and go back to more actions. And then you want to go to virtual device manager and you have to start up the device that you want to simulate in. We're going to use the Pixel 9 Pro and we're just going to go and hit this play button, which is going to open up Android, which is going to look like this. So we have a side-by-side way to test out and debug the application, and we can see how it looks like. So we're going to close this out, and you can see here there's an Expo logo which we can click on. I think automatically it should open up the Expo automatically. So I'm going to rerun the app again, so you can see here that it's bundling the actual application and then it's automatically starting it up inside of this Android Pixel 9 Pro simulator. So you can do a side-by-side look at what's happening. That's the Android version, and then I also have the iOS version. So you can lay it on the screen. If you have two monitors running, you can have it side-by-side like this. And then every time you make a change to the code base, you can actually see it from here changed as well. There's like a workout tab they created. You can kind of see the difference between the interfaces here for Android and iOS. It's a bit wonky on the Android, so you're gonna have to make some tweaks to make it work specific to that. Looks like it's very minimal so far, but I kind of like where this is going. We can go back to WindSurf and prompt it here again. So this is like the current window specific to installing Scaffolding the app. So we're gonna go ahead and start a new conversation. So let's modify the app for the workouts to when you click on add workout, it would show screen to pick the exercise. All right, so now added the exercise page where we can pick the exercise. We're gonna go ahead and just fix the workout for Android since we can't really click on the add workout button. The iOS looks great, but yeah, needs. I'm just gonna go ahead and send that prompt. All right, looking at the Android screen now, it looks like it's done fixing the top of the UI. So now it added like a little spacing on the top. So now it looks like it's good to go. So you can see that when you add a workout here, you can see this is what the UI looks like for the iOS and this is what it looks like for the Android. So this video looks very similar now. You can go to the dashboard. You can see the timer here when you start, and you can see a quick timer here. You can do a reset, go back here. All right, so once we have a basic UI for our application, now it's currently running in our simulators. The next that I added here is the features.markdown file, which will allow us to keep track of the features that we need to implement in the application. So we can just drag it into the Cascade and we can just we can just tell Cascade what to build next based on the feature set that we have specified here. The next thing I want to talk about here is another life quality improvement, is that every time we want to build an application, we have to start up the simulator for the Android and iOS. Then we have to run a tunnel for Expo to expose the IP so that we can debug it on our app. We are going to go ahead and go back into customization. We're going to go ahead and click on it. I added a couple of workflows. So I took 15-25 minutes around there to add a couple of workflows. So let me explain what it does. So if you look at the package.json, you can see that there's a bunch of commands here as far as starting the apps specific to Android and iOS, and then also for the web. And there's some other stuff that we also need to do as well, such as running the app and then making sure that the port or the process is not currently running. So I added this workflow which will do all these things for us. So let me go ahead and expand all this and go through the workflow. So I just told Cascade to build me a workflow specific to the steps that I've mentioned before. So the first one is to start the simulators and the Expo tunnel, which is you can start a workflow by going back into Cascade here and doing a slash. So you can see that whenever I do a slash, now you can see the different workflows that we can run. So instead of having to prompt it to do all these different steps, the workflow will allow us to basically specify a path to the workflow, and we will know what to do after that. So in the workflow itself, we're telling it that here's our prerequisite. And if there's an Expo instances running, it's going to run this check and it's going to kill the process IDs, right? The next one is going to check for these ports. And then it's also going to start the Expo, which is for the tunnel. So it's going to run this command under this path. If you want to view the app in your device in real time while you're building the app, you have to download the Expo Go in your device, whether you're using iOS or Android. And you can enter the URL that Expo Go will expose. The next thing that's going to do is going to boot up the iOS simulator, and it's going to prefer the iPhone 16 Pro. I've specified which type of devices for iOS I want to boot up initially, and also for the Android. So you can see here that it's preferring to use iPhone 16 Pro, which is opening up. And then the next one is to boot up the Android emulator, preferably the Pixel 9 Pro, Android 16 with this API 35. So you can find all this information when you first launch the device manager for Android Studio. It's going to run this command, which will open up the iOS simulator in this particular port and also open up the Android simulator. So it will run these tasks in parallel using agents or sub-agents. So let's say I close this one. Let me go ahead and close it. Let me shut down the simulator. So now that we're ready to go, we're going to go ahead and actually we can stop the workflow for dev all stop. Is basically going to do the opposite. So we have a start and then the stop. This is going to kill all the existing processes. So if I do a stop and then hit enter, it should go through all these steps. It's going to stop the simulators for Expo and then it's going to kill the processes, right? So you can see here that it killed all these processes and it shut down all the boot devices. So when we start debugging again, we're going to have a clean slate since all the process involved with debugging the application is going to be killed on this step. All right, so once it's done, you can see the Android Studio with the device manager, and both of these devices are currently stopped. So if we do a dev all start and then hit enter, we're going to see here that it's going to start up the device for that we have, and then it's going to boot up the application. After a few seconds, so you can see here that now it switched to a stop button, so we can stop the process now. All right, it was actually waiting for a prompt for me to actually accept it. So now it launched the iPhone simulator. So the first one was Android, and then it booted up the iPhone 16 Pro, and it should launch the app momentarily here in the iPhone simulator. So I'm just waiting for that to happen. All right, so now our workflow is currently working and it's working perfectly. So we have a workflow for starting our environments, such as our simulators for both iOS and Android. So we don't have to worry about starting our simulators manually and then starting out creating a tunnel for testing for our devices. The next thing that I added here is a new workflow for doing a git commit push. So typically when I want to do a git commit, either I would go in a terminal and do a git command, or I would just mention it here in the cascade that I want to make a commit and push all these changes. Instead of doing that, I can just do a git here. So if I go back into customizations, I have a new workflow here called git commit push, which will essentially stage the changes that we have currently in our project and then perform these commands in the terminal and create a detailed message and then push it to origin. Once we add it here in our workspace, we can just go ahead and go back into Cascade. I can just do a slash command and do a git commit push, and we can just hit enter and then hit enter again, and it's going to follow the command. So instead of having to prompt it and do all these git commits messages, I can just go ahead and just do a slash git commit push and it will take care of the rest. So that's pretty much it. One last thing I want to talk about in this video is how to work with the simulators. So let's start with the Android first. So this Android's on the left side. You can rotate the screen if you're if your app supports different orientation or rotation, you can go ahead and rotate it this way. If you want to go back into the home screen, you can do that. So if you want to go back into the actual app, you just have to click on the Expo logo or icon, and then you can go back and click on the application that you're working with. You just have to go and click on this home icon, and then you're just gonna have to swipe through until you find this Expo Go, and then it's gonna launch the app or the last app that you picked inside of Expo Go. So I think that's most of the things I want to talk about in this video. As far as GPT-5 is concerned, I'm just trying it out right now and see if it's going to be part of my main workflow as far as coding. But for now, I'm just trying it out. I'm going to keep using it in the meantime while it's free inside of WindSurf. And then I'm probably going to go back to Sonnet 3.7, just depending on the pricing and how much it costs as far as credits to use GPT-5. But I still like using Sonnet 3.7 just because it costs 1 credit to use, and it pretty much satisfies most of the coding requirement that I throw at it. So yeah, so that's all I want to talk about in this video. If you have anything that you want me to do a video on in the future, please let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye.